Hi, I'm Bonnie Kemke. Welcome to my studio and welcome to Quilting on a Thread. Today I want to demonstrate something that I call micro hooping. So when we start out working with these hooping frames, and especially if we're using a domestic machine, we find that we begin to be limited by the vertical space that we have from front to back to stitch out our designs. And now you have to keep in mind that I started out with a Jazz 2, which is a 12-inch throat, but it really only had 8-inch vertical quilting space. And then I moved on to a PQ 1500 SL, that's a brother machine, with 8.5 inches of throat, which gave me only 5 inches of vertical space, but I had the Sure Stitch regulator. So that was, even though I lost vertical space, it was an improvement in my quilting journey. So you would think that with only having 8 inches with the Jazz and 5 inches with the PQ 1500 SL that I was limited to any pattern that was only 8 inches or 5 inches deep. So you would think. But I learned early on to go ahead and do these little micro shifts of my hoop. And so I would move up an inch or 2 or 4 inches to be able to finish the ruler work that I was working on, the motif that I was working on, whatever the pattern was that seemed to call for more vertical space than I had. And so I thought when I got my Unique 19 that, hey, that's over with, right? And it really isn't. There's still times when I need to micro hoop. And one of those times is on this elephant splash, the Paisley elephant splash that I'm working on. So what has happened here is that I can't stitch all of my raindrops that are up in the air. I have to micro hoop to get to those. But I didn't have to micro hoop. I could have just swapped the feet to do the work that I wanted to do, and then swap the feet back to do the new section, and then swap feet again to do the echoing that I want, and then swap feet again. And so for me, micro hooping is any time that you are hooping with the intention of saving time, regaining space, or saving effort. And that's what I'm micro hooping this quilt for, is saving the effort of not having to continually be swapping feet. So I am using 3 feet in this quilt. I'm starting out with my micro stippling foot. Then I will move on to using the 360 Wonderfoot to do a series of echoing patterns. And then I fully expect to move on to the ruler foot to do some ruler work for the background. So having explained that, let me go ahead and cut away and give you a view of how I micro hoop. So before I reorient, I just want to let you know that how I will accomplish this so that I can get back to the original position is I will mark my quilt with some quilting pins. These are 2.5 inch number 2 quilting pins. They have that nice little curve in them. It makes them handy. And then I have some of these 3M, it's actually a roll of rulers on 3M type material, and I cut off several 1-inch strips. And I'm going to use these in the field where I might be stitching, so if I hit them, all I have to do is rip it off and throw it away. And the safety pins, the quilting pins, those will be out of my field of quilt area. So they're there to help me rehoop, but they're out of the way of my needle. So we'll be back in a moment. All right, I hope this is not too awkward, but what I'm going to do now is I've already got, this is very, very level with the back of my quilt frame and with the front of my quilt frame. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here with one of my safety pins, one of my quilting pins, and I'm going to go right up to the base of my blue clip. And I'm going to put a pin, and this pin is over off into the area where I'm not going to be sewing. I'll take another pin and do the same thing on the other end. Now what this is doing for me is giving me the ability to get back. Now I will not only worry about that. I'll also be using a computer ruler, and the reason why I use this ruler is because it's a nice good 2 inches off of the back of the quilt, and that's about where I'm comfortable beginning to stitch with my machine head. So I will also have this off into the side. Now what you may notice here is this is a piece of cornered cardboard. I use that to lift my bungee cord clips up off of the, well, that keeps them out up in the air. And so when I bring my my machine head this way, I don't bump these with my ruler table. Normally, if I don't have this in here, these are the quilt. Well, let me just pull one out and show you what happens. So I just take this and just remove it. I'm not going to worry about it being taut or nothing at the moment. But as I'm moving this, here comes my, boom. Now I'm hitting the ruler table with the bungee clip. And so short of putting my hand up in there and grabbing both of them, that gets in my way. So I use this, and what this is this is a packing cardboard, and it's formed like in an angle, and that would have went on the corner of something that was shipped to me. So I just found these very useful, and what I do is I bring it up here and I rest it on the side of my frame, and so it's on that, you know, this gray clip around the side, and it's on the gray clip in the back. But now my machine will come all the way to the end of where I'm quilting. So that's coming all the way to the end of my quilting zone. So I don't have to worry about that. So we've talked about my pins that I put in, and we've talked about my little safety mechanism, which by the way is on both sides of this quilt. So now I have these little sticks of tape. They're just an inch long. And so I'm just going to put those parallel to where my pins are. So what this is doing is this is giving me a return to place. Seriously, that's when I rehoop and come back to get out of my rehooping situation, my micro hooping situation, I have a mark. So the next thing that I have to look at is why I'm having to micro hoop is because I have this teardrop here. Let me get this out of the way. I have this teardrop here, which you may or may not see very well, but it comes down into here. Well, that last inch of it, I can't really quilt easily because I have the ruler table on there. So if I bring this over here and I bring it down, that's as far as my needle will go. And I've got at least an inch of that teardrop that I cannot get to. So I need at this point to micro hoop to be able to get to that teardrop, but I also need to be able to get to the other teardrops that I did not sew. And then I have some here, because here's the tip of my elephant's trunk, but there are some teardrops down here. So if I can get to the point where I can sew this, quilt this, and then quilt these other teardrops, then I can come back up and change my foot. And so that's what these markers that I put here for. These are my guide points to get back on my micro hooping so I can be essentially where I intended to be. Now then the other thing that I want to do is, because I need to get to the point where I can sew him, I'm going to go ahead and just mark out for right now. So if I take my ruler and I come down here and I say, well, I want to come to where this ruler is marked at 8 inches. So I take another bit of that tape and I put it at the 8 inches right here in the center. That's where I want to shift up to here. So I'm just trying to explain this as I go along on what my process is. There's that one. Now I'm not going to need a pin on the side of there because I'm not needing to, on the side of my quilt here, because I'm not needing to come back. But if I were ever intending to come back, I would go ahead and put a pin here. And so just for grins and giggles on this, I'm going to go ahead and put that in. And I'm a nib shy. So let me get that out of the way, mark my 8 inches, down about here, and put my pin in. So now I am ready to do my micro hooping. So the first thing I do is go ahead and get these out of the way because they will interfere with anything and everything I do. So I'll take those out on both sides, and I'll take off my bungee clips on both sides. Get them completely out of my way. Now this normally goes very fast for me, less than 5 minutes, but when I'm talking somebody through it, now luckily, because I'm not shifting right or left, I can leave my bungee clips right where they are hanging off. So now I remove my clips on the belly bar and my clips on the back bar, at least the elastic clips. Put you back in place. Then when I remove these clips, I always put my finger into that ridge and pull up. So I put my finger into that ridge. Again, everything always goes back into this basket, and the reason being is so I don't ever have to look for them. Now this quilt unrolled itself because it's not that long. But what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to give myself some position, and I have these clips inside here, so I don't want this unrolling on me. So I have these clips that I use. I'm just going to clip that here so it doesn't continue unrolling on me. And that gives me something to work with and steady the quilt with. That's just because this quilt is so small that it really doesn't have anything to, any weight to hold it onto the frame. So now I'm going to go ahead and go to the back and remove these clips. And I just always remove the 2 side clips first and then remove the center clip. And I'll tell you my trick for why. Because I can hold that center, and now I can just start moving things forward. And of course I'm not needle down, so I'm just going ahead and letting my machine be moved around by the cloth. But I get this up here. And I also happen to have things marked in the center. So I'm going to make sure from the back that I'm still centered up. Because what I have done on my machine, on my frame, and I don't know if you can see it, but I have some tape that marks the center point. So I just want to make sure that I'm somewhere in the center. And I'm close enough to the center that I'll keep everything still lined up on my machine. Yes, that's where I want to be. So now that I have this kind of spread out and it's basically lined up, now I'm going to take my ruler and my center of my clips. I'm going to come back here, and so I want to get this lined up to where that is in front of my ruler or just under my ruler, because that gives me the ability to get to the stitch area that I want to be at. So I'm going to, once that's in place, let me move. If I move the quilt down and use the table of the quilt, that kind of helps me too. So I've got that in there about where I want. And I take my clip. Always be sure that when you put these clips on, you can read the Cutie. So I've got that clipped in place. Now I'll avoid my elastics because I think I was pulling on an elastic under here. Move my machine. Yes, because I want to go ahead and make use of the quilting ruler, the quilting table to get this in place. So take my next clip. Put that in place. Now when I'm looking at it, I see that I let this one shift back a little bit more. So that's okay too, because I just undo it, move it a little bit, come back in, clip. Oh yeah, much better. That's pretty much what I want to do. Now, to be quite honest with you, on this quilt, it's not critical that I be level. But I make it a habit to stay level. And the reason I make it a habit to stay level is that way, if I ever get to a point where it is important that I stay level, I haven't developed bad habits. Having been an engineer for so many years, I know that once you let yourself have a bad habit, whether it's a bad habit in working out a mathematical problem or a bad habit in how you save a file or whatever, just letting yourself keep a bad habit or practice a bad habit, it reinforces that activity in your mind. And so the bad habit becomes pretty much ingrained in your behavior. So I tend to try to always follow the best practices, and that keeps me from developing and learning bad habits. One of the things that I do before I proceed is roll my quilt. It's easier to unroll the quilt and do something over than it is to get out of the problem you created by not rolling your quilt in the first place. So usually when I hook the back clips up, I come right in and go to tie those off. Now there's two reasons for using these clips. See, it gives this very small quilt some weight, and that weight is going to let me really line my quilt body up. So I take my front clips, and the cool thing about these front clips, and I know I've gone over this a couple of times in some of my videos, is these front clips will let you, I'm going to take this pin out. These front clips will let you ratchet your quilt body a little tighter. So just start at an end and slowly walk that quilt down. Don't tighten it up yet. Get the other clip in. So start at an end. Clip that down. Now that you're in there, you want to go ahead and ratchet forward, and that tightens up the bed of your quilt a good deal. So now that I've got that done, I just come back into my bungee clips. And let me walk around the camera here. And now I'm going to successfully be able to get to all of those. That clip came undone. So since that clip came undone, let me go ahead and check all my clips and bring my ruler back in place and make sure that it's still lined up. And it is. It's good enough. So now I know that I can get to all of these other teardrops, and I can get to the top of this teardrop, which caused me to need to micro hoop. So by doing that bit that I call micro hooping, where I just hoop just about halfway of what I would have normally rehooped, because normally I would go all the way up, all the way down. So this is going to save me swapping feet in and out, so I can finish all of the initial work on the teardrops with my micro stippling foot before I go in and start using my 360 Wonderfoot. And so I will go ahead, when I'm done with this, I will swap to the 360 Wonderfoot, and I will begin doing the echoing that I'm going to do on this quilt with that foot, and then I'll micro hoop back. And as you'll recall, I have the pins up at the top and the tape to remind me where I need to get rehooped to in my micro hooping where I go forward. So let me go ahead and roll this up. Now I could just as easily leave this down and let it waterfall, but because I want to be able to get in and out of the drawers under my quilt, I'm going to, in this instance, just prefer to have the quilt secured up front and not waterfalling. If I weren't going to be swapping the feet, I would probably just let this waterfall. So I hope that helps you in your quilting journey, and I hope you learned something. And let's see you again the next time here on Quilting on a Thread. Bye-bye now.